Hello, thank you for joining Jen Quintana here. This is my second podcast recording. And this morning, what I want to talk about a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit, is being raised as a Jehovah's Witness. That is definitely part of my foundation. The first 20 years of my life as part of that organization. And the reason I haven't talked about it much in the past, and I don't talk about it to people. In fact, it's only been recently that I've even been comfortable sharing that with people. And I've really been kind of wondering, like, why don't I want to tell people that? And I think it comes down to that it feels like a scar or a mark or something that's embarrassing. And I'm really having to just kind of really dig into that feeling and see where does that come from. And so I think I've decided to overcome that feeling and to really just share my story a little bit. I think it's important. I was just watching Taylor Bjorndal, who was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. She just did a series of YouTube videos about her upbringing. She definitely had a different experience in the organization than I did, just more abuse. And I think I'm really proud of her. Like, I feel like she's so young. She's just left the organization within a year, and she's already brave enough to tell her story to the world. And if you see how many people have watched her videos on YouTube, you'll just see how much healing needs to happen out there, how many people have been affected by being raised in this organization that are still struggling with making sense of it and coming to terms with it and really healing from the experience and moving forward. And so I think the work that she is doing is really helping so many people feel not so isolated. And when I think about how many people are still in that organization, maybe young people who just don't know how to get out, I think it's important that we all start telling our stories. It's kind of a support network that needs to happen. And so I am going to tell my story here this morning briefly, and a little bit about what it was like for me being in the organization, how I left the organization, and how I've kind of come to terms with it since I've left, the journey that I had to go through in order to overcome some of the brainwashing that happens when you're in an organization like that. And also, I think at this point, I'm 27 years out. And so I have really gone through all the stages of grief and come back to a centered position. And really, I'm able at this point in my life to not only articulate, what wasn't great about it, but also take away what was great about it and what I did get from it. And part of my journey as an adult has been to ask myself the question of, why would I choose to be born into this religion? I do believe we have past lives. I do believe that we choose our parents. And so it's certainly not a belief that I was taught in that religion. But as an adult, I have come to know these things. And so I wonder sometimes, why did I choose to be born into this religion? Also, I know so many people in my life who are who I've had past lives with, who I've been soul connected with for a long time, beyond this lifetime, and all of us chose to be born into this religion in this lifetime, so what was that about? So these are my questions I struggle with in my adult life. I want to share my story here this morning, so let's just get right into it. I was raised in a family with, my mom was the third generation in her family. Her parents were raised in it, and her grandparents found it, actually became Jehovah's Witnesses back in the day. So Jehovah's Witnesses, they call themselves as being that their religion is the truth. So they refer to it frequently as the truth, not as the Jehovah's Witness religion, but the truth. I even find that some of my adult cousins who are no longer in the religion will still refer to it as the truth, and I'm constantly reminding them, like, it's not the truth. We have to stop saying that it's the truth. It's just a name, but it's like a form of brainwashing, really, because we were all taught to call it the truth, as a name like that we call the religion when we're inside the religion. And it's just this subtle intention of we buy into this lie that it's all true. And so I don't call it the truth anymore. I haven't for a really long time, but I know a lot of people still do. And so I'm going to just put a public service announcement out there to y'all. If you're not in it anymore, stop calling it the truth. It's the Jehovah's Witness organization. It's an organized religion. I think it did come from like an original intention of goodness. I think people were trying to find truth in the Bible by studying it themselves. There was a little bit of a rebellion against the idea that only ministers and priests could interpret the Bible. And so there was a Bible study group that formed. Other religions also came from that same starting point. It's my understanding that the Seventh-day Adventists and maybe some other groups, there was a group at one point called the Russellites. They all came from the same founding Bible study group back in the late 1800s. And while they had a good intention, I think that it went awry somewhere. And it became very rigid and very controlling. And basically, it's a fundamentalist Christian religion. And I think that fundamentalism is really not healthy. I've kind of found fundamentalism in a couple of different places in my adult life, and I really recognize it right away when I see it now. So anytime that there's just like a really strict interpretation, there's no room for other viewpoints, something's very exclusive, not inclusive, that right away for me is a red flag that this is not a healthy situation. Things are not fluid, and it's one person's interpretation, one man's interpretation of something that doesn't make me feel comfortable. So getting back to my upbringing, I was fourth generation. My father, on the other hand, became a Jehovah's Witness as an adult. He had been raised in an orphanage. I think he was like Episcopalian maybe or Catholic, and also raised in a very rigid environment in that orphanage in North Dakota. I think the orphanage was actually in Ohio, but his family lived in North Dakota. And then he grew up on farms in his teenage years when he left the orphanage. And so he's an interesting person. That's a whole separate podcast. But because he became a Jehovah's Witness as an adult, like many who do that, he was very gung-ho about it. I'll say gung-ho. He was very into it. And so it's kind of like, newly into it and very zealous. So he became an elder, and he had left his wife. She did not become a Jehovah's Witness when he did. They had children already. They had a falling out. They got divorced. So here he is, a single dad with his two children, in the religion, very gung-ho, and he becomes an elder, and then he wants to marry my mother. My mother was 25, he was 50. So that happened. At 25 years old in this religion, you're pretty much a spinster already. Like, people are looking at you like, why aren't you married already? Because marriage is, the only way to have sex. Because the religion, like a lot of religions, right? You have to be chaste and save yourself for marriage. So if you're not married, then there's this kind of interesting question about, are you a lesbian? Are you having sex with other people and we just don't know about it yet? So there's this frown that happens around you. So I'm sure for my mom, it was kind of like, oh crap, I better hurry up and get married. And here's this guy that wants to marry me, and he's quite a bit older than me, but it's an opportunity. And there were other people that wanted to court my mom. She just wasn't interested in them, and I've met a few of them. They were kind of losers. So I'm glad that she married my dad, even though there's a huge age gap. My dad had grown children. His oldest daughter was just 3 years younger than my mom. They even went to the same high school. Crazy. And my brother was a teenager living at home. My brother ended up getting out of the house as soon as he could. There was a lot of fighting, I understand, after my mom and dad got married. And my brother did not like the idea of having a stepmom that was just 5 years older than him. And so my brother, got out of the house. The only way to get out of the house when you're a Jehovah's Witness is to get married. So he got married right away and moved out. And then my sister actually was disabled. She had polio as a child. And so she needed a trach in her early 20s. She had a life-saving trach put in and tracheotomy, and she was on a ventilator. It wasn't, they were called respirators back then. Ventilators came out later, but she was on oxygen at night, and she never was able to live on her own after that. So she lived with us my whole life. And so it was my dad, my mom, and my older sister who raised us. My brother moved out right away. We didn't grow up with him in the house. My mom really didn't want children. I think that she married this man that already had children. She probably thought she was off the hook, but my dad had different ideas. And so I was born, and then I have a younger sister. So my mom and my dad had me and my younger sister, and then I have my older half-sister from my dad's first marriage. And my dad was really a health food nut, so he was really into eating healthy. He was really connected to nature. He was an arborist. My half-sister's part Cherokee, Indian, my half-sister and brother. And so we just grew up with a reverence for the earth, for nature, for Native American ways of taking care of the land. And I don't think all Jehovah's Witnesses had that influence. I think that was unique to our family. We didn't have sexual abuse in our immediate family, although I know many Jehovah's Witnesses did. My cousins did. My ex-husband did. So I think it's pretty prevalent in the organization, and I think just the way the organization is set up, where it's such a closed community, there's so much trust for these elders and leaders of the congregation, that it kind of just lends itself to being an environment where pedophiles can run wild. Fortunately for me, that didn't happen in our immediate family that I'm aware of. And my childhood was a little bit idyllic when I was very young. We were all about going to church, getting dressed up and going to church. Women always wore dresses. And we went 3 times a week. That was our life. And we didn't really watch television. My father was a big fan of calling the television the devil's eyeball. So we didn't have a lot of outside influences, and we spent a lot of time outside in nature and camping. And my dad was very social. We had people over all the time. Different leaders from the organization, district overseers, circuit overseers, would come over to our house for dinner. I remember we would always have these big dinners. Missionaries would visit from Bermuda. They would stay at our friend's house or at our house, and we would have big potluck dinners and try different foods from different regions. So there was always this kind of train of missionaries and people visiting from out of town coming and staying at our house, and us having potlucks and social events with other people in the congregation. And there were lots of children in our congregation. And so it was really fun, and it was a great sense of community, and we felt really safe, and the world was good, and we were doing the right thing, we thought. And while the rest of the world was going to hell in a handbag, we were going to be saved. So everything was good in my world. And then when I was 6, my father died, and tragically, unexpectedly, and that shook my world. And so a lot of that has really affected me as an adult, more than anything else, more than being raised in the religion. But I definitely have this sense of my life before my father died at the age of 6, and my life after the age of 6. And I was still in the religion, but it was different after the age of 6. And it was, the social part of it kind of came to a close. My mother didn't have the same health food love that my father did. So it went from like wholesome dinners around the dinner table, Norman Rockwell style, to frozen pizzas and hot dogs. Nobody wanted to sit around the dinner table after my father died because it was too sad for us really to see his chair sitting there empty. He was the head of our household. He said the prayer before dinner. And we still said prayer before dinner, but we just stood around the kitchen, and my mom or my sister would take turns saying the prayer. And we would just get food off the stove and go sit in the living room, watch TV and eat. So after my dad died, that's how it was. My mom took on a business partner to run my dad's business. He didn't have any life insurance because, we were going to live forever in a paradise. So what do we need life insurance for? So my mom had to keep his business going. That was our only form of income. And so she had a business partner. And after a while, she started dating this man who was not a Jehovah's Witness. And so that was a big problem for our family. My mom was publicly reproved, which is where they tell the whole congregation there's a special talk and everybody has to come. My mom had to be there. We had to be there. The whole congregation is there. It's a special talk. They don't say the name of who the talk is about, but everybody knows. And they talk about that you shouldn't date non-believers. They did at my mom's talk, whatever. The talk's always about whoever did something wrong in the congregation. And so there's this big talk about not dating non-believers and how that brings shame to Jehovah and to his organization, and how, one rotten apple can spoil the whole bunch, and blah, blah, blah. So after that, the congregation was counseled not to associate with my mother. Basically, don't associate with anyone who's dating a non-believer, and my mom is the only one in the congregation dating someone who's a non-believer. So that was very clear. We weren't invited to any social outings or gatherings after that, unless my sister Linda was invited and she could bring us along. But we were pretty young we weren't really creating our own social situations yet. So we got to see everybody still at the Kingdom Hall, or if there was a congregation picnic that everybody was invited or included in, we would be at that. Sometimes there'd be like a congregation wedding where everybody was invited, or a baby shower where everybody was invited. But if it was a smaller event or dinner at somebody's house, we were no longer included in those invitations. So we spent our time going to meetings, seeing everybody at the meetings, not being invited out to dinner afterwards, like some people would. And my mom became more isolated. She did not stop dating Armando. We started to find other people in the congregation who had non-believing spouses, because maybe they became Jehovah's Witnesses after they got married and their spouse didn't. And so then my mom made friends with a couple of those people, and we would sometimes go to those people's houses for dinner. It was just a different kind of vibe. And then at the same time that we were kind of being excluded a little bit, we were also being held up as Rusty Leader's daughters. This elder who died tragically, and we were his daughters, and it was the whole congregation's obligation to raise us properly in this religion. And we were held up as examples for everyone, and we had to be the best, and we had to be the examples for the congregation. And we were frequently asked to participate in the congregation meetings. They call them meetings, church services. Other people might know them as. And we joined the ministry school. I joined at age 7. So the ministry school is where you prepare extra lessons. You give talks from the stage. We went to the meetings 3 times a week. There was a 2-hour on Sunday, a 2-hour on Friday, and a 1-hour on Monday. And we had to prepare for those meetings. Even small children sit with their parents throughout those meetings. There's no Sunday school for children. It's from a young age, you're taught to be with your parents. The Kingdom Halls are kind of like their church or tabernacle. It's their meeting place. They call it a Kingdom Hall. It's very plain. There's no images. There's no windows. They take that Bible verse very seriously when it says to not worship pagan images or graven images. So it's very plain, very simple, a little Amish. And that's fine. That's how it is. That's their belief. And so we went to this church place, this Kingdom Hall, 3 times a week. We had to prepare for those meetings. That was more important than schoolwork. Schoolwork was secondary. Any kind of schoolwork that didn't uphold our beliefs, like if it was a science class and it talked about evolution, well, then we were instructed that we could answer the questions to pass the test, but we had to word them in such a way that it would indicate to our teacher that we did not agree. So I could say, according to the theory of evolution, this is the answer. Just to let the teacher know that I studied well and I knew the answer that he wanted me to put down, but I didn't agree with it. It was just a theory. It was according to this theory, this is the answer. And when we were younger, there was a book, it was a pamphlet or something that our parents always gave to the teacher, our class teacher, to say what we believed and to let the teacher know that we were not going to be participating in any holidays or birthday celebrations, or saluting the flag. So Jehovah's Witnesses don't salute the flag. They don't participate in any government politics. They only believe in God's rule. They don't believe that man can govern himself. They're respectful of the law, but they're not going to participate. They don't go to war, and they don't salute the flag, and they don't vote. And they don't celebrate any holidays because holidays, they believe all are from a pagan root, which is probably true. That's why I celebrate holidays today. So the winter solstice celebration really is, where Christmas is rooted back to. And so they don't celebrate any holidays, and they don't celebrate birthdays. That's a whole long story. But so we didn't have any of that as part of our culture, which is fine. I don't think we really felt like we were missing out on any of those things because no one in our congregation celebrated those things. It just wasn't part of our culture, part of our DNA. It just wasn't something that we did. And we really only noticed it at school when other kids were getting Christmas presents and birthday presents and having celebrations. But, the Jewish kids didn't celebrate Christmas either. So it was kind of like, it just was our religion, and different religions celebrate different things, and it didn't feel totally strange. But we also weren't really building relationships and connecting too much with kids at school. We could connect during the day at school, but there were no extracurricular activities. We weren't going to be going on play dates, because there was no point in us spending time with people who were not part of our organization, because they were not going to survive Armageddon, which was imminent my entire childhood. I remember my dad saying I was never going to go to kindergarten because Armageddon was going to come any minute. And then the night before I was supposed to go to kindergarten for the first day, I remember being like, am I really going to kindergarten tomorrow? And they're like, yep, it's on God's time and it hasn't happened yet, so you're going to kindergarten tomorrow. And then I remember my mom telling me, oh, they told me I was never going to go to kindergarten. And I remember looking at my mom like, you're so old. And they thought you weren't going to go to kindergarten because Armageddon was coming. And now they told me I wasn't going to go to kindergarten because Armageddon was going to come. And now I'm going to kindergarten. So that was kind of my first clue that my mom was kind of like a skeptic, a secret skeptic, right? So I went to kindergarten. I went all the way through school. I'm now 47, still no sign of Armageddon. There was a time that Jehovah's Witnesses thought that somebody had predicted that Armageddon was going to come in 1975. I was only 3 then, but apparently my uncle ran up all the credit cards. And so my uncle ran up all the credit cards and sold their house, the house that they lived in, I guess, and was just living large because the end was near. And then that didn't happen. So that put them in financial ruin. And I think that happened to a lot of witnesses at that time. Just bad financial choices based on that they thought the end of the world as we knew it was going to end. So, and then of course, when it didn't happen, then there was all these excuses of why the people who made that prediction had miscalculated, and that it was on God's time, and that we didn't understand. We needed to just trust in God, but it was definitely near, but we just didn't know when it was going to happen. So that was all. I'm sure to this day, they're still preaching that it's going to happen any second. And so that, that's like a certain place of fear that you're put into as a child, and a place of empathy for those who are going to not make it through Armageddon, because only the Jehovah's Witnesses are going to make it through, right? So that's kind of the impulse, the impetus for everyone to be preaching and knocking door to door, is they're trying to save lives. And it was really put upon us that, we were going to be guilty, blood guilty for their lives if we didn't do our best to try to save them. Kind of like how, the ark, Noah and the ark. Noah had to tell everyone that the flood was coming. It was on them that they didn't believe him, but he had the duty to at least warn them. And so we had this duty to warn everyone about the end coming, and it was on them if they didn't take it up. I have to say, in all my years of knocking on doors and going out in service every single weekend, it was just part of our Saturday morning ritual was to go out in service, knock on doors. Since I was in a stroller, I remember doing this. And then after I joined the ministry school at the age of 7, that's when you start reporting your time into the headquarters. So they start to keep track of how much time you're spending in service. And weekly, you turn that in, or monthly, I think. I have to say, in all my years of going out in service and knocking on doors and spending my summers as a teenager, putting in extra hours, and I even one time went to what they call to go like be a missionary where the need is great. I went to an Apache Indian reservation and to rural Arizona. All of those trips and hours of my life spent doing that. Never once did anyone ever want to study the Bible with me. Like, I never started one single Bible study, and that was our goal, was to start Bible studies and convert people. And I know people did get converted. I mean, that's how my dad came in, but it's like so rare. You got to find like the really downtrodden person that's willing to buy into this whole thing. And I think the way people get into it is that it's like an immediate family, an immediate community, and it's a place for them to be, to have a home and to have a purpose, and to be a part of something. And so people come into it. People are either born into it like I was, or they're converted into it. But I don't know. A lot of people are not being converted into it, I don't think, as you might think. It just seemed like we were out preaching a lot, and I did not see a lot of Bible studies happening, at least in our congregation. So that was my childhood. And as we got to be older, we got more involved in doing things. There was, every kid rebels in some way. We couldn't really rebel very easily. We were dressed very modestly, and all of our activities were planned. And so it was funny. I remember we used to go to these big conventions every summer, and they would be at a big stadium. I don't know if they do this anymore, but back then, it was the 70s and the 80s. We went to these big stadiums. We had them at Dodger Stadium, actually, and we would sit out in the sun in like our full church attire all day long, from like 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock at night, and listen to these preachers over the loudspeaker and follow along in our Bibles and take notes. And we did this for like 3 or 4 days. And so we started, the kids, the young people, like the rockabilly thing was happening then. And so it was like, I don't know, early 90s, I guess. But so we started like dressing up really vintage clothes, vintage dresses, rockabilly kind of style. And our parents didn't really catch on that we were being worldly, because they were a little behind in the times. And so it was a way for us to be kind of trendy, but still be wearing our dress and our church attire. Right. And so I remember my ex-husband looked so dapper in his 4-button vintage suit. And so we would all start to congregate on the blue level of Dodger Stadium. That was like a big thing, the blue level. So it was like you would go, everybody from all over, all these different congregations from all over your district would meet up at Dodger Stadium for this annual convention in the summer. And then the kids, like, the word kind of got out that we were like, we'll meet you on the blue level. And so we would all like be just casually walking around the blue level trying to run into our friends, and then we'd find friends and we'd all kind of congregate together and walk together. And then when we got old enough to not sit with our parents, then we would choose to sit on the blue level with our friends. And you would have binoculars so you could see the speaker, but then you'd really be looking across the stadium to try to find your other friends on the other side in the other levels. It was really funny. And so that's what we would do. We would pretend like we were watching the speaker with our little binoculars in our vintage rockabilly outfits. And we'd be looking across the stadium to try to see who was sitting with who. And then there'd be like, word would get out, like there would be like an after party at somebody's house, right? Because their parents weren't going to be home. And so there started to be this kind of party scene that the kids would get into. And we would sneak alcohol. And we were naughty. We were worse than like, stories of Catholic schoolgirls. We were terrible. And so we had this little secret life. And I think it's funny, a lot of ex-Jehovah Witnesses, I find they are attracted to these kind of secret societal underworlds. I got into like gothic clubbing for a while, and and my ex-husband got into the punk scene in LA. And so I think there's something about being secretive, kind of being, you're taught to be different than the world and to go to school but not participate. And so there was something about being kind of in plain sight and in plain view, but being different, that was part of our culture. And then as we came of age and we're kind of finding our ways to rebel against our parents, we were in plain sight. We were at the district assembly, but we were having this big social scene going on. And then we were organizing our own social events after church, right? And meeting up in restaurants and stuff. And then I think as more of us even rebelled and started to leave being a witness in our young 20s, we kind of gravitated towards these secret clubs and these secret subcultures. And I see that's pretty prevalent in a lot of XJWs. Like it's kind of a thing, I think, because of the way we were raised to be kind of secretly operating in plain sight. I don't know. It's a weird thing, but it is definitely a thing. The other thing I've learned as an adult about being raised in the way that we were raised is that everything was black and white. Like everything was yes or no. There was a right way to do something and a wrong way to do something. There was very little gray area. People were not encouraged to think outside of the box. And so as an adult, it's very hard to be open-minded and fluid and surrender and not be decisive about something. So I'm a very decisive adult. When a question comes to me, I ponder it until I solve it like a puzzle. And so I'm spending a lot of time on giving up that kind of control of knowing the answer and really waiting to see what unfolds. So that is my lot in life, I think, is I was kind of wound up tight as a child in this world of black and white. And as an adult, I have to be comfortable with not knowing the answer and be comfortable with being open-minded and allowing whatever arrives to arrive and not knowing the conclusion. And so that is something that I think all ex-Jehovah Witnesses have to deal with. And sometimes we're not conscious of it. Like it took me a while to become aware that I was kind of hardwired in that way. So there's this hardwiring that happens when you're raised in that religion. So that's just something to observe, I guess, as an adult and be aware of. I finally left the religion when I was about 20, right after my son was born. I ended up moving in with my boyfriend. We ended up having sex. I didn't really want to have sex with him. It was kind of a drunken situation. But my mom found out that we had sex and that he was staying at my apartment. And so she encouraged us to go to Las Vegas and get married quickly before the elders found out. So she gave me some money. She loaned me my sister's car and off we went to get married. And I think there's kind of this thought of like the first person you have sex with, you have to marry them, right? Otherwise it's going to be all, it's going to be wrong. And the only way to save face when you have sex before you're married is to marry the person you had sex with. And so that's what I did. So we got married very young and we made it work, and we genuinely liked each other. We genuinely loved each other even. But we were very young and we had to, find our way. And my ex-husband's family was a little different than my family in the religion, and he had abuse that he had to work through, and it pushed him into a path of drinking and drugs as an adult, and that wasn't something I could cope with. I got pregnant right away after we got married, so I had a child at 22 years old, and I left my husband because I couldn't manage his self-destruction, self-mutilating, and drinking and self-sabotage. And so I ended up a single mom, very young, and not wanting to be a part of the religion anymore, really seeing that it was based completely on fear and guilt trips, and not wanting my son to be raised in that environment. And I just remember thinking, like, what would happen if I gave up guilt? Like, if I just gave up guilt, how would my life be so different? Because you end up having guilt for missing meetings and or questioning the beliefs, and then you hold all this guilt. And I also was a part of a big inquisition by the elders, because one girl in our circle of friends got pregnant, and then there was this big inquiry into how that happened. And then it was so crazy because she told the truth about how it happened, and they didn't believe her because she didn't have a witness. There's this rule that they'll only believe something if there's two people that say it. So she asked me to be her witness, but by being her witness, then I got pulled into like all these questions about what went down that night. And I saw the underbelly of the organization in those moments. I was 19, so my mom didn't have to go with me. But I went to this huge elders meeting. It was one of the elders was a chiropractor, and he had a chiropractic office. And so it was at nighttime, and they had all these kids that were involved. There was like some night where I didn't even stay the whole time, but I guess it happened after I left. But there was like strip poker had happened, these kids at this after party. And then one of the dads, like was an elder, was holding Bible study with all these kids, and he kind of knew what we were doing, and he was condoning it. And there was a lot of underage drinking going on, and then this one girl got pregnant. And so all this testimony had to happen about the event and what happened and what led up to it, who was involved, who was there. And so I got called into these meetings to testify about what I knew, who I saw, who was there. And I was totally cooperating. Like, I thought I was doing the right thing. People were on conference lines, people whose parents wouldn't let them come to the meeting that lived out of town. And then some kids were there with their parents. And so I was sitting in this room the whole time with these elders, and they were praying and reading scriptures. And then somebody would be drug in to say what happened while I was sitting there. And then I heard like parents cussing out elders, and elders praying and reading scriptures. And I had never experienced the religion from that side before. I'd always been like a perfect angel, and my father was an elder, and I had never seen that side of it. And I got in a little bit of trouble at the end of the day. I got like privately reproved for underage drinking because I had been with that group that night, but I had gone home before the strip poker happened. And I had heard about it, but because I came forward and cooperated, I got in less trouble. But like the one elder got removed as an elder, and people got disfellowshipped, which is where you get kicked out of the religion. You're not really kicked out, you're just shunned. Like, you have to still go to all the meetings, but no one's allowed to speak to you, and your family's not allowed to speak to you or eat with you. And you have to do it for like a year or 2 years before they let you back in. So you're like totally isolated. That happened to my brother. He got disfellowshipped after my dad died. And it happened to my grandmother when she was really old. My aunt turned her in for smoking cigarettes, and she got disfellowshipped. Super crazy stuff happened. But when I kind of saw that underside of it, how interested the elders were in talking about the details of any kind of sexual activity, how I saw parents yelling at elders, and I literally came home from that night, and I think I probably had a nervous breakdown. I just remember being in such a dark place and having like this pain in my heart that was so great that I literally felt like I just had to rip my heart out of my chest energetically and throw it on the ground and walk away from that religion. And so that event started me on my path of just not believing everything that they told me and not trusting. And so when I got married, my ex-husband now, he started questioning as well. He started having repressed memories of abuse. It kind of all came to a head, and we just decided that it wasn't for us anymore. And he had tried to commit suicide. I was pregnant. He was in a coma after trying to kill himself. And for 3 days, I was in the hospital pregnant, sitting by his side. He lived. Um, but this kind of dark stuff happens in that religion. And when we left, like in order to get out of the shame and the guilt, the only way really out mentally is to just say there's no God. If there's no God, then there's no holding me accountable to all of my sins. And if there's no God, then there's no punishment and there's no Armageddon, and I don't need to worry about living forever. And if it's all just not true and there's no God, then I don't have to feel guilty. And I don't have to live in fear of God's retribution or of disappointing God. And so really the way out of that religion is through atheism. If you become an atheist, you can just breathe. And so that's what I did. I said, there's no God. And that's it. And I remember my ex-husband helping me down this line of reasoning. He's like, think about it, Jennifer. He's like, why do we believe in God? We believe in God because the Bible says there's a God. And why do we believe the Bible? Because the Bible's written by God. He's all, it's a circular argument. It's a conspiracy. We believe in God because the Bible says there's a God, and the Bible is true because it's written by God. So it's all just a big lie. So I was able to kind of wrap my head around that logic and declare myself an atheist, give up the guilt, which felt fantastic, and just move into my 20s as an atheist. And at that point, it was different for me than it was for my ex-husband. My ex-husband was like, there is no God. I could do whatever I want. I could rob banks because there's no punishment. His whole childhood, he was raised in fear of God. And without God, he had no self-control. And so no impulse control, nothing to stop him from doing anything. I hadn't been raised quite that way. So for me, it became more about if there's no God, then I have to decide what's right and wrong. And that's a big responsibility. And I took it up in a big way. And I had a child, and I had to decide, how am I going to parent this child? What is right and what is wrong? And so I started just pondering questions. I decided to be open-minded to everything until I really knew the answer, and not to believe any answer that was provided to me until it came really from a deep knowing within myself. And so I started putting myself through college. We weren't allowed to go to college in that religion. I think they changed that rule later, but now I've heard they're discouraging it again. So I started putting myself through college. I was working full time. I was taking care of my older sister who was disabled. She got more homebound. I would still go to the memorial every year and kind of keep my foot in the door for the sake of my sister, because I didn't want them to disfellowship me or cut me off from her. My mom had gotten married by this point, and Armando moved into our family home, so I moved out quickly at 19. We were, there was a lot of problems with that whole relationship because the church had, encouraged us not to go to their wedding and not to support their marriage. And so there was a lot of separating us from my mom in a way. And then there was Linda, who was disabled and still needed our help. My younger sister moved out of state as soon as she could, like at 20. She ended up marrying an elder, and took her a while to get out of the religion. I was the first one really out. And then after I was out for a while, my cousin followed suit. She kind of got out, and then we were the only two out. And then my mom eventually followed. My younger sister followed. My sister Linda died. After she died, I never went to another memorial or anything ever again. But it was a long process, many, many years. I raised my son by myself for a while. I would throw him a birthday party. No one would come from my family. It'd just be like my neighbors or a few people that I had met outside of the religion. I still have about 4 really close friends that I had when I was a Jehovah's Witness that also aren't really in anymore. They still have a lot of guilt, I think. They didn't all go down the atheist path like I did. But for the most part, everyone I knew in the religion is still in the religion, and they're not in my life. And one of the things I had to do in order to get out of that religion was not only give up the guilt and move into this place of atheism, But I didn't want to be disfellowshipped because I needed to take care of my sister. And if I was disfellowshipped, she wouldn't feel comfortable talking to me or eating a meal with me. So I had this goal of getting out of the religion without getting disfellowshipped. And so how I did it was, there was a big fear in the organization of lawsuits. A couple of people had sued the organization because they'd been disfellowshipped and severed from their families, and they had won. And so there was a fear of lawsuits. And so I recognized this. And the reason these people had won the lawsuit was that the disfellowshipping was taught by the church as a way of protecting the congregation from the bad seeds, right? So I decided to disfellowship them. I stopped associating with or talking to anyone who was in the church except my immediate family members and my couple of friends who were also leaving the church. And so I stopped returning phone calls, stopped participating in any social events, stopped going to any meetings, and I didn't give them any reason to need to disfellowship me because I was not associating with anyone in their congregation. And then there was this one couple who was friends of our family, and she was kind of like the person who would do everyone's taxes, and she was the executor of my sister's trust fund. She had a trust fund from when her mom passed, and I made it clear to her, her husband was an elder in the congregation, that if they tried to come after me or disfellowship me, I would sue them because I needed to take care of my sister Linda, and the disfellowshipping would only disrupt that one relationship. And I already wasn't associating with anyone else in the congregation. And so they left me alone. They didn't bother me. I was able to get out without getting disfellowshipped. And then once I wasn't associating with anyone, they didn't know what I was up to or what I was doing. So there was no reason for them to call an inquisition against me and disfellowship me. I was kind of lived my own life. And then I met my current husband when I was 24, and we started living together, and we just kind of stayed to ourselves. And I still lived in the same town where I had grown up, and I just lived my very separate life away from that. This is before the internet, before Facebook. I find people now on Facebook that are in the religion that I grew up with, and I'll Facebook them for like a minute, and then it's funny, like as soon as they see that I celebrate Christmas or I have a birthday picture up or something, they'll unfriend me. So that's fine. Like a couple people haven't unfriended me. And through those Facebook pages, I can kind of check in on my old friends and people that I grew up with. I know it's not their fault. Like they just believe what they believe, and they live in fear, and they have guilt and shame, and everything has been demonized to them about the outside world, about any kind of other thought, beliefs, patterns. Mysticism is heavily demonized. So I know that it's not their fault. They just can't know me because they're in this very controlled, confined world. And I try to just live my life as best I can and try to be really centered. I'm no longer an atheist. I recognized at some point in my, late 20s, early 30s, that atheism was my way out, but that by being an atheist, I was still allowing that upbringing to impact my world. And I probably wouldn't be an atheist had I just been born into some regular family that went to church once a month. And so because I was born in this extreme religious situation, I had to make some extreme choices, and I had to make the decision about whether or not I believed in God, which other people maybe hadn't been forced into that position. And so by being an atheist, I had made a decision to be something because of how I was raised or in reaction to how I was raised. And I didn't want to continue to be affected by that religion. So I had to make a conscious decision to then even be open-minded to not being an atheist. And so I had to say, well, I don't know if there's a God or there's not a God, and I need to just be open-minded to whatever unfolds and take it one step at a time and go deep within myself and really hear what rings true for me, what resonates within me as truth. And I've had a pretty good gauge for that. So I've always, since a young age, been able to go deep within myself and sense what I feel is right or true within myself. If I feel anxiety, then I know I'm on the wrong thought path and I have to jump off it. And I have to trust my intuition. So developing a meditation practice has been really great for me. Lots comes up for me through meditation. And then just trusting my gut and my intuition. I remember one of the first things I knew was true was astrology. And astrology is so demonized within the Jehovah's Witness religion. And I was in my early 20s and I just believed astrology was right. Like I just had this knowing about astrology. And I write about it in my blog, my belief in astrology. And I read every book I could find on astrology. I was so interested in it. But so that was one of my first mystical curiosities that I really did a lot of research into and developed for myself. And since then, I've just kind of followed this path of being interested in a lot of things. I finally had my first awakening experience. I got awakened from the religion, obviously, when I was like 19 or 20. But then I had like a full spiritual awakening at age 42 in Maui. And now I really feel like I just want to be a seeker. I want to be open-minded and I want to find my way to enlightenment. I think my goal is enlightenment in this lifetime. And in order to do that, I have to shed a lot of the old thought patterns and beliefs and hardwiring that I got as a child. And I'm working on all that. I think too, there are some positives, right? So I learned study skills. I learned how to study, how to take notes, how to sit still through a lecture, how to sustain my attention span. I mean, if we didn't sit through a 2-hour meeting quietly, we got spanked. My mom carried a wooden ruler in her diaper bag, and my aunt had a wooden spoon. I don't think we were spanked as much as some other kids were, but we were spanked, and we had to sit still, and we had to listen, and we had to participate. And as much as like that sounds horrible, I have fantastic study skills. I can make an outline from a bunch of text, quickly, and discern it down to the core meat, because we had to take notes as we listened to all these lectures at Dodger Stadium and all these places that we had to go sit for hours on hours, but to take notes in the scriptures and tie it all together and be able to regurgitate it back to our family at the dinner table. So I got some great study skills. I really value community. So there's some good things that came from it. Not a lot, but a little. I also got a really strong Bible knowledge. Like my husband now, he has no clue what the names of the books of the Bible are, or the timeline in the Bible, or when people quote scriptures, he has no idea what they're talking about. So we got kind of a basic, I know what the characters are in the Bible. I could say the books of the Bible backwards and forward when I was a kid. I've read the entire Bible several times. And so now as I read other mystical texts like Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, which I love, I get to read those scriptures now with a new light, read them as metaphor. And it really changes my whole perception and understanding of the Bible. But I think having that foundation of knowing what those verses and texts are, and then being reintroduced to them through these mystical authors as metaphor, it's great. I can really take it up. So there's some good that I got from my upbringing. And for me, there wasn't as much abuse, and so it wasn't as horrible as it was for some other people. But so that's it. That's my life growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, how I left that organization. I've certainly been on quite a long journey since then. And although that's kind of how I started, it certainly isn't where I am now. And I encourage anyone who is finding themselves in a very structured, rigid religion, or anyone who's left a very structured, rigid religion and is claiming atheism as their path. I salute you for getting out, and I encourage you to consider where you're at now and consider if that is the balanced path that is really who you are and where you should be. And, can we be more open-minded, and can we really explore the things that cause us fear and anger and grief, and see where those feelings come from and follow them back and heal. I think we're all on a healing journey. And I know many people who've been part of an organized religion, be it Catholicism or Jehovah's Witness or Mormon, or Scientology, and it's a healing journey. It really is. And it's not an easy path. But I think a lot of people in this country, by and large, even if you're born again Christian or whatever you are, and sometimes I listen to Joel Osteen on the radio. It's interesting to me. I think he has a great message. He's a born again Christian. I don't subscribe to any one particular religion. I don't think I ever will again. But I think you can be a member of a religion or a church, and that can be great for you. But it can also be taken too far, and it can become too rigid. And so those are the ones I would just caution people against, and just to make sure that you're balanced and open-minded, and kind of matching up anything that you're being told against your gut intuition. And if it feels right, and if it feels good, and if it resonates with you, then that's your right path. But if it feels anxious or angry or guilty, or if you feel fearful, or anxiety is coming up, this is not healthy. So that's where I'm at. I'm on the healthy path. Let's all get on the healthy path. Thank you so much for listening to my second podcast. I'm super excited that you stuck with it, and I hope that we have many more conversations in the future. Thanks so much. Bye.